Hello, C3RF members and Canadians from coast to coast. Welcome to another edition of In Hot with your moderator, Major Russ Cooper, retired. Recall that in hot is a fighter pilot term, talks to a pilot being cleared in hot on target with weapons armed and ready. And today we are going to roll in on target with an able wingman in the form of Rod Taylor, who is the leader of the Christian Heritage Party of Canada. And the target that we're aiming at here today is election 2021, and the Christian Heritage Party's place in it and what they have to say about it. By way of introduction, Rod is national leader of the Christian Heritage Party of Canada. He lives with his wife Elaine in beautiful Bulkley Valley, northern British Columbia. They have 2 married children, 4 grandchildren, and this summer they celebrated 47 years of marriage. Congratulations, Rod.
Yeah, thank you.
That's quite a stint.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Rod worked for 25 years in the lumber industry in British Columbia. He also worked 6 years for Canadian National Railways in Alberta. He's a longtime director of the Smithers Pro-Life Society. He's been active in both provincial and federal politics. He is the 2021 Christian Heritage Party candidate in his home district, Skeena Bulkley Valley. Provincially, he helped form the Christian Heritage Party of British Columbia and served as its interim leader from 2013 to 2020. He was elected national leader 2014. He writes weekly commentary for Christian Heritage Party and in 2018 authored a book entitled The Substance of Things Hoped For. He is currently leading his team of CHP candidates in the 2021 federal election, and the CHP's theme is life, family, and freedom. And right there, Rod, I'd like to use that theme to kind of spring off into the world of principles. That theme to me speaks of bedrock principles that the Christian Heritage Party unapologetically says are based on biblical principles. Now, in a day and age where separation of church and state and indeed secularism is the order of the day, how should Canadians, particularly non-believing Canadians and non-Christians, relate to the Christian Heritage Party, and how should the party relate to them, given those biblical principles?
Yeah, very good questions. And of course, many of your listeners and viewers may know that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that is often referred to by people on the right and the left, they talk about violations of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It begins with the preamble, whereas Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So even though that's in the preamble, and sometimes the courts have not always applied it with equal value as the rest of the charter, at the time when it was put in, it was important to lay that out. That is the bedrock of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and our repatriation of the Constitution in 1982 is Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So we think we're on pretty safe ground. We're not promoting a theological kind of a construct for Canadians. We are promoting the principles that are based on a biblical understanding of the world. So some of those principles, take some of the basic ones. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor as yourself. These are kind of thematic distillations of the work of Jesus, his life ministry, and sort of his expression to the world at that time. And again, we're not trying to make everyone, a Christian believer or, to subscribe to any particular theological point of view, but we do believe that those principles of loving your neighbor as yourself are essential. And they come, like, that was a distillation of, say, the 10 Commandments, where things like don't lie, don't steal, don't kill. These are basic, I'm going to say, principles or foundation stones of our understanding of ethics, how we deal with other human beings. And they are shared by people of other religions, not just the Christian religion. But everyone basically knows it's wrong to steal, wrong to commit murder, or to injure an innocent person. And so, I think we go back to those principles, and they are, for us, they are rooted in a biblical understanding. I mean, statements in the Bible, both the Old and New Testament. But at the same time, we think that they apply equally to Canadians across the country, whether they adhere to a Christian philosophy or not. And I tell people that you may not be a Christian, but if you're a Canadian, you have a Christian heritage. You have a set of laws and ethical expectations of one another that is rooted in a biblical understanding of the world.
I think you're correct in that when you look at our whole Western society, it is based on a Judeo-Christian ethic that informs all of our systems, our courts, the way we legislate, the way we think about people as sovereign individuals who are worthy of rights and freedoms that are not bestowed upon them by a government or a state, but by a higher authority above government and state. And in that respect, I think I could see where the party is actually quite close to Canadians and the way Canadians would probably like to see this country go. When we talk principles, I'm noting this election. I don't know about you, but there doesn't seem to be too many principles that are being talked about in today's election. We hear there's a lot of a political expediency. We hear talk about gun control as the ballot box question of the day, perhaps childcare, perhaps the medical system as the ballot box question of the day. But we've just gone through a year and a half where our civil liberties have been crushed, absolutely crushed, and no one's talking about them. Is the CHP talking about these issues?
We certainly are. The trampling of our rights and liberties, freedoms as citizens. The latest thing is this proposed vaccination passport or whatever. I mean, it's not only proposed, they're both provincially and federally. There are politicians and bureaucrats working furiously to bring that to pass. And that to force every Canadian to take something into their body that they may not want to take, and it's an experimental drug. I mean, the thing is so far over the line as far as compelling Canadians to do something they don't want to do, and either enticing them, bullying them, threatening them, and the federal employees are threatened with a loss of.
Sorry, I think I heard it was just Premier Kenney the other day was offering $100 if you go out and get a vaccination. I thought $100 for a vaccination. My goodness, how cheap.
Yeah, well, really, I mean, it's one, of course, the cost of the vaccination program is making Pfizer and the other producers of these pharmaceutical experimental drugs and making them very rich. They're making billions upon billions. They have a captive audience. And as the governments comply with them, big business, big media, big pharma, and big government are a terrible coalition. And it's that crushing mentality that we will make you do what we want you to do. Government was never meant to be a controller of the people. The people are supposed to be in control of the government.
Yes, and it really feels like the boot is on the neck here, and I am very, very concerned because I see what seems to be happening, and it seems to be happening deliberately, is our politicians, our leaders are setting us Canadians off against each other. They're dividing us. Prime Minister Trudeau very recently, and as recently as today, I think, is basically calling the people who do not wish to be vaccinated. He's calling them as bad people. They're people who are going to make other people sick. They're going to destroy the lives of little children and elders. This is really we're getting to the point now where it's almost blood libel that we're starting to set up within our Canadian environment.
And in the midst of all that, of course, and part and parcel of his push to make everybody follow his edicts is the censorship of alternate opinions and not just opinions of armchair philosophers, but renowned doctors, immunologists, vaccinologists, those who are doing research on the highest levels, who understand virus and, the viral research and so on. And many of them, and of course, some doctors like Dr. Hoff in Lytton, BC, who reported he had given vaccinations and he was reporting his own results, what he saw happening, the neurological damage to a significant number of those vaccinated. And, he's, been excoriated, threatened, and, his opportunity to serve his patients, his community as a doctor is being limited.
I think he's lost 50% of his business. He was taken out of his emergency room activities, or he lost some sort of portion of his business as a result of speaking out.
So my hat is off to doctors like him and nurses who, at great personal cost, are telling the truth. But when the government says, well, if you say things that disagree with us, then we're going to censor you through social media, through career, we're going to threaten your career so you don't have a platform anymore. I mean, this this is the beginning of tyranny, and maybe not even the beginning. This is tyranny.
No, I think we're right in the middle of it, Rod.
Canadians have to stand up for their right to be heard and their right to hear alternative opinion. Otherwise, people are going to make decisions based on misinformation. I mean, the government says it's concerned about misinformation, but much of what it has put forward over the last year and a half has been misinformation, and they just stick by it. They think, some of this stuff is not bearing out, but we'll just keep saying the same thing. As I think it was a Nazi, personality who said, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the accepted reality.
Actually, I thought that was Minister McKenna. I thought that was Minister McKenna said that, or was it someone before her?
I think maybe more than one. It may go back to the to the Caesars and the pharaohs of ancient times, but certainly, if you can control the public narrative, this is what's so scary. We saw it in Nazi Germany. We saw it in all the communist regimes, the Soviet Union. And now we're seeing it in our own dear country of Canada, and it's very painful to see people being deceived and not necessarily realizing it. There are people who should know better, but they're trusting the leaders, and really we should be able to trust our leaders. I mean, that's why we have elections, and we do have to think that these elections are going to be conducted honestly and fairly, although the media will make sure that people do not vote with a full stack of information on.
Well, it seems to me, just from my observations, that the media is complicit in this whole these unsubstantiated narratives that are being floated out there. And I see the media. It seems to me they seem to take their cue off of I think Prime Minister Trudeau. If the Prime Minister mentions gun control, then the media, as soon as they hear that, they trundle over to Aaron O'Toole and they ask him all these questions on gun control, won't let him talk about anything else.
Right.
So they're right in there with this, with propping up these narratives. But these narratives, more than that, at the political level, they go beyond the political level now. We're talking about agencies, institutions, federal, provincial, all buying into the narrative. And for example, in Ontario, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario recently put out a notice to all doctors in the province that you better watch what you say, because if you go against lockdowns or social distancing, or you have other ideas on therapeutics, your job might be at stake. And that was pretty clear that doctors were being threatened by their overriding institution, overriding college. Yeah. So it's seeped into our police, our law enforcement, our courts. Do you see this as an issue that needs to be addressed at the political level?
Well, certainly. And of course, the Prime Minister and those around him in his cabinet control a lot of what the public receives. They can use taxpayer money, and and even the big political parties, of course, use taxpayer money, but particularly the government can throw money around and hope to influence the result of elections. And unfortunately, it does influence the result of elections. But they also, with that money, well, obviously CBC, what do they get? $1.5 billion
over a billion
a year.
Yeah.
And they have been not the thermometer that they should have been over the years for news stories about abortion or gender issues or military or anything else, or about COVID now in the last year and a half, but they have been a thermostat. They control the narrative. I mean, I'll just give you an example politically. They have a vote compass, and you get to judge the so-called the leaders that are running in this election. Well, there's actually probably about 20 leaders. I am one of them. CBC has never called me up during this election to ask me one thing. My name isn't mentioned. They show those who are higher in the polls, and of course, lots of times they control the polls as well. But if people go on CBC and they see 5 or 6 leaders of political parties, and they don't see me and they don't see others, they're going to assume that those 5 or 6 are the only ones who might win, either their own seat or that their parties might succeed. And so that right away, my tax dollars, I'm a taxpayer, my money is going to support the CBC, and the CBC is blindsiding people, failing in their role to give people enough information to make an informed decision. I mean, there could be people out there that don't like our position, but right now they don't even know that we exist, according to the CBC.
Not fair at all. I mean, it's not like the Christian Heritage Party hasn't been around a steady political partner for Canada. I think you formed up in 1987. That's a little while ago, so it's not like you're brand new on the block or anything like that.
No, founding convention, 1987. Yeah, and so it's just frustrating. And then, of course, the Prime Minister gave $595 million to other news outlets who basically support his point of view. He's cutting off funds to pro-life organizations. I mean, whether any, there's a whole question about whether the government should be funding any organizations. But with the summer jobs that a couple of years ago, there was a big story about that. Well, they only give it to the ones who support their point of view. I mean, that is using taxpayers' money against their will or without their knowledge to promote their own agenda, and that's just simply wrong. And that gets down to a principle. The principle, again, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't commit murder. This government is doing all those things.
No, it's partisan. It's partisan politics at its worst. And as you say, it's taxpayer funds that are being used to put this political partisanship in place. And it used to be that governments used to at least say they wanted to balance a budget, but it seems like it's gotten to the point now where it's unpopular to say that you're going to balance the budgets. Even the Conservatives are laying off on that bedrock of their conservative policies and saying, well, maybe in 10 years we'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
Where does the Christian Heritage Party come down on finances and debt?
Well, again, the principle is we shouldn't be stealing from our grandchildren, and if we spend money today on the things we want, or the government spends money on the things some of their voters want that we can't afford, they're not being honest. Because the governments have no money. The only money they have is what they can take from taxpayers, right? So some people think that the government is just handing out money. But anyway, when we steal money from our grandchildren by allowing the government to buy our votes with our grandchildren's money, that's violates a principle. The Christian Heritage Party would introduce mandatory balanced budgets. I have to admit, I mean, that's long been our policy. We're now over $1 trillion in debt. The last number I saw, which was for last year, is we are spending $67 million every single day on interest on the national debt. That's $67 million that we can't spend on other projects that the government needs, on the military or on healthcare. So, we have to get in control of that. When inflation is going up, interest rates will be going up, are going up. Yep. And when the interest rates, they've been, wonderfully low for an awful long time, but when they go up, we will not be able to afford even interest on our national debt, let alone to begin repaying it.
No.
It's amazing that it was actually under the Liberals before Stephen Harper got in, that Paul Martin actually was bringing the national debt down. And, the Harper government, conservative government, I mean, they had the recession in 08, but 07 was the highest spending budget in Canadian history up to that time. And so they should have been using that surplus to pay down the debt, but instead, it's a temptation of politicians to spend that money on things that they think voters want. And if voters are happy with that, they can get another term in office. But sooner or later, someone has to tell voters the sad news or the straight news that we're overspending. We're going to have to cut back here and there. And it's an unpopular, kind of a narrative for people. People don't really want to hear that. But if we're not honest with the people, then when we are elected, we won't have a mandate. If the government says we're going to do all this and we're not going to raise taxes, et cetera, and then they do all this and they can't afford it, they're just not being honest with people. I think Thomas Jefferson famously said that democracy will only last until the people discover that they can vote themselves money, and that's exactly what's happening today.
I think that's where we started off the conversation talking about principles, and I think it's those principles that are strongly held that serve as a check and balance on governments drifting off into buying votes and spending their grandchildren's money. It's those bedrock principles that keep a political party on track and give the citizenry some sort of assurance that they're in good hands, that they're not going to be fleeced. Quite frankly, it's my personal opinion. I feel like I've been fleeced over the last year and a half for upwards of $400 billion in deficit. That's a deficit's just over a period of 1 year. It's not total debt, but $400 billion in a year in a year and a half that was supposed to be about flattening the curve and buttressing up our medical systems to handle the surge that we were expecting with the COVID-19 virus. And you look back on the year and a half, and how much money did they actually spend on the medical system? I can't see much money at all being spent on the medical system. It was all spent on payments to individuals to keep them from working and keep them from keeping their businesses. It's been an absolute catastrophe.
Yeah, that's just been money down the drain. Obviously, we all want to meet the needs or try to help meet the needs of those who are impoverished for whatever reason. But in the sense of a government policy, an ongoing policy to hand out money to encourage people to stay home, basically, that's a habit, especially for young people coming out of school. And the first thing they learn is that I can sit home and the government will look after me. That is a very bad kind of a template for their future career. These young people have energy, they have ideas, they have strength and skills that they need to be putting to work. And so we need to get back very, very quickly. We need to get everyone back to work and let business do what it does best. We should be removing the carbon tax for one thing. Carbon tax, I mean, I don't want to go, we probably don't have time to go into a whole lot of stuff about carbon dioxide and whatever, but that carbon tax is raising the price of every good and service in Canada at a time when people are watching their pennies and saying, when is this going to be over? How is it going to affect it? Maybe I'm still working now, but what's it going to look like next year? And restaurants, certainly in places like that have been impacted by the lockdowns. Many of them have lost their businesses, and others are just treading on thin ice. We need to get this economy back to work, and the things that the government is doing now are hindering that, not helping.
Well, I think carbon tax, excellent topic, far-reaching indeed. But I think in the Canadian context, when you talk about that kind of a tax, and you talk about elasticity, the ability of a tax to do its job. The carbon tax is supposed to make us think twice before we put gas in our car tank. But in Canada, you don't really have that ability to not put the gas in the tank because because we live in a dispersed society. We've got northern climates. We've got to heat our homes or else we're going to die. So that elasticity that would allow that tax to work in Canada just isn't there. It doesn't seem like it was made for Canadian consumption. It seems like a tax that came out of Europe, and our leaders picked it up as kind of a narrative, and they're imposing it on us. And we see that across the board.
What do they
Sorry,
say?
I was going to
ahead,
mention
sorry.
one other thing, and that is particularly with our Western industries, oil and gas. This is destabilizing them. This whole approach to climate change, and it's like there's no other approach or no other way that could be thought about to get about doing the same job without this amount of hurt.
Yeah, well, and I think they say that Canada produces about 1.5% of the world's
It's less than
carbon
2.
dioxide. But beyond that is the question whether carbon dioxide is even a bad thing. And, you know, that is the narrative that the government has been pushing. Governments around the world have been pushing. But that the jury is still out on that one. And there are many people who say carbon dioxide is a good thing. Well, we know plants need it to survive. It is not a pollutant. It is not toxic. It's part of our natural environment. And so we think the resources were put there for our benefit. We should use them. Canada can be and should be energy independent. We should not be purchasing petroleum products from conflict zones in the Middle East. We should be using the resources that God put in under the land in our own country.
Responsibly,
and,
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, those are things that we are concerned about. These narratives that get going and are promoted by the mainstream media, by governments. And after a while, they take over. I mean, now they're pushed in the classrooms, right? Whether it's COVID or CO2, that stuff is being pushed in the classrooms with young children. By the time they get out of high school, and certainly if they go through college, they're going to be have such a distorted view of reality in terms of gender. No matter where you go with this discussion, our young people are being led down.
You just opened up a whole new can of worms there with Bill C6, gender identity. It always surprises me how these things seem to go one way. You know, it's I think the bill actually says that you're not allowed to take a person who's in a non-traditional mindset who wants to go to a more traditional mindset. You can't interfere with him or her at all. But you can interfere with a child who is thinking about going to a non-traditional mindset. Then you can dope them up with hormones. You can mangle their bodies. You have to affirm that that is the right direction to go. These narratives are one way only. They're one-way streets.
Yeah, exactly. I always liken the left, if we use the left kind of loosely and generically, left-wing politics, left-wing thinking, I liken it to a ratchet. Ratchet, you know, they take a little bit more and there it stays. You can't go back. And then they take a little bit more, and all of these policies, whether it's abortion, gender confusion.
There's no compromise. No.
Yeah, people back up a little bit. You draw a line in the sand, and after a while, you get tired of trying to hold that line. You back up a little bit more, and now we're living in a country with some pretty crazy points of view about reality. That we have a heritage, not just Canadian, but humanity. The Western world has a heritage of marriage between a man and a woman that goes back thousands of years, and just in recent decades, that whole thing has been turned upside down. And people say, well, what difference does it make? Well, it does make a difference. And we are beginning to see some of the fallout from bad decisions that have been made.
Well, we're making for a lot of confusion. The indoctrination our children are going through in school is causing a lot of confusion. We're seeing a lot of young people in Canada having problems. A lot of drug use, a lot of overdosing. We're not in a good place when you talk about social society as a whole. We're just not there.
People, you know, we all, I think, left and right, we all talk sometimes about the tragedy of suicide. I mean, I think we all feel the tragedy, and certainly if it's a personal thing of someone that we know, it is a tragedy. And yet, so they kind of use that as a threat. Well, if you don't allow these young people to transition, there will be suicides. The reality is many of them that transition do commit suicide, especially when they find out they can't go back.
Yes.
And that whole part of the equation is completely ignored. And at the same time, those who talk about suicides are busy introducing medical assistance in dying, which is nothing less than assisted suicide.
Yes.
And now they've added, the mentally ill to that category.
Oh,
People who
boy,
can
boy.
request.
You know what that reminds me of, Rod? That reminds me of Nazi Germany when they had a program. It was called the T4 program, and I guess it all got kicked off by a German citizen wrote into to Hitler at the time, and he said, "Look, I've got this problem here. I have a it was one of his children, or I think it was one of his children, was mentally ill, incapacitated, maybe it was Down syndrome, something like that." He wrote off to the Fuhrer and said, what do you think? Can I get your permission to do away with this family member? And Hitler wrote back and said, that's probably a good way to go. And that letter and that T4 kicked off the T4 program, which snowballed into something that just became just a horrendous terror. And it just seems like this is the same kind of thing we're doing here in Canada. I mean, we're just not thinking about these things.
Dr. Erwin Lutzer has written a great book. It's several years old now, When a Nation Forgets God. And I think, tying it back to our original discussion about principles, in chapter 1 of the book of Romans, it says when people reject God, he gives them over to delusion and to do things that aren't convenient. I mean, it goes way beyond being inconvenient, but some of the solutions, so-called solutions to problems that secularists are cooking up in our country, secularists, socialists, left-leaning politicians are cooking up solutions that are no solutions at all. But it's because they refuse to return to the principles that made this country great. And by the way, the preamble to the charter, it says that Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. That's so right. We lean a lot on the supremacy of God, that we should be paying attention to how he has directed us to order our lives. But the rule of law is equally important in that statement. The rule of law means that every Canadian should be treated equally.
Yeah.
So under the rule of law, if I choose to remain unvaccinated, which I will choose to remain unvaccinated with this experimental COVID vaccine, I'm to be treated equally. I should be able to enter a restaurant, unlike what's being imposed on me right now by Bonnie Henry in British Columbia, and the Prime Minister would like to see overall Canada. Yeah. I should be treated equally. If someone steals something from me, it doesn't matter who that person is, or if I steal something from someone else, the person should be treated, every person should be seen as equal under the law. We know in this country that's not always the case. There are special groups that receive special treatment, and their opinions or anything that violates their rights seems to be more important than if it happens to you or me. So anyway, we are concerned about the principles. And I think if we just went back to that preamble to the charter, if our legislatures, our parliament, and our courts and our enforcement people would live by that charter, by the preamble, we would be much better off than we are today. We might even do something about this national debt.
Isn't that very profound? I mean, our own court system, our Supreme Court justices have come out and they've made comment on the preamble, and they've gone so far as to say that it's a dead letter. It's there, but it's not. It shouldn't really be there because it's not. It doesn't treat all religions the same, or they have their reasons. But really, that preamble, if it was taken seriously, I think it would do the country a lot of good. You note that equal before the law, and I'm just thinking back, and it seems like there are so many things now that people get different treatment for, depending on which side of the argument they stand on. You can't, the summer jobs program, you could not get any money unless you attested to the fact that you're all for the government's abortion on demand programs.
Right.
Everything seems to come down to what side of the narrative are you on? And if you're on the wrong side, well, then you're not a first-class citizen. You're a second or third-class citizen. And
Right.
I don't see a country being able to last very long with that kind of divisiveness going on.
Well, I think that's what all Canadians need to recognize. Sometimes we and others who think the way we do about some of these issues get accused of being alarmist. We're thinking too far ahead. Oh, it'll never get that bad. And then it does get that bad. And the same people say, well, no, you can't change it. Now it's been changed, right? So when we are...
the ratchet has cranked down one notch. The ratchet has cranked down one notch, like you say. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, we will continue to speak out, even if some think that we are, going too far, because the reality is that these things are coming. This nation, throughout history, nations have collapsed. Canada is not immune from a moral, social, economic, cultural collapse, and even military, being able to defend our borders or whatever. Canada is not immune from that. If we continue to choose leaders who choose bad policies, we will go down that road. Rome fell. Rome was the greatest, civilization in its day, and it eventually collapsed in upon itself. And Israel, those who follow the Bible, read the Old Testament, Israel rose and fell time and time again. God would call them to repentance and to obedience, and they would have maybe a great leader that would come along for a time, and they would choose to do the right thing, and they would prosper and receive the blessing. And then they would get a bad king. They didn't get to vote for them in those days, but they would get a bad king who would take them down a road of idolatry and sexual immorality and so on, and the nation would collapse. But Canadians need to realize that our country is not immune. It's up to us, every individual Canadian who is of an age to be able to think these things through, needs to be thinking them through, needs to be taking in the information, not just what mainstream media feeds, but looking for good information. Right now, it happens to be COVID. Next week, it could be climate change. It could be any number of things. But we need to base, I think where you started is correct. We need to base our decisions on principles, not on the latest fad that comes along or some theory somewhere. Principles, and we believe that some of the best principles are found in the Bible. So we think we're on solid ground when we stand on biblical principles.
Yeah, it seems like you've built your house in a rock there, Rod, and I think it's Canadians would like to know that there are political parties and leaders out there that are principled, that do operate on a set of bedrock principles that serve as a check and a balance that the citizens can trust in. But I could go on, and I think we could do this all day long, Rod. But I got to let you go, and thank you very much for your participation, and wish you and your party well this election season 2021.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate so much the good work you do at C3RF. And for those of your listeners who may or may not ever been to our website, we are at chp.ca. And thanks for your interest in what we're doing, and we certainly applaud what you're doing. If enough Canadians will put their shoulder to the wheel and help move this rock, we can survive as a nation and improve and make a better country. So we hope many people will do that.
I'm an optimist.
All right.
Thanks again, Rod, and good luck.
God bless you. Thanks so much.